morning, everyone. So we'll start now the second session. We have had in the last couple of days very rich sessions and discussions about lots of different aspects of democracy, starting from the description to the different approaches to lots of challenges, deep thoughts on democratic transition and transformation. Now actually it is the time where we would like to hear on how to move forward, what would be the different trajectories and maps that we can follow in order to embark on the journey of the democracy. And here we have two giants who are going to be addressing us today. One is that I do not need to introduce, Dr. Ismail Sirajuddin, and the second speaker is Mr. Terrell Boricius, who is one of the worldwide guru of the sortition concept and methodology. So we'll start, Dr. Ismail Sirajuddin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. As you both know, you all know, this session was planned for the end of yesterday. And in the design of the conference, it was reasonably expected that by then we would have really described democracy, gone over its history, talked about its problems, and done a lot of these things, but that we really would not have jumped much into the future. The references of what would happen into the future were largely related to whether or not we could use mobile phones for instant polls of the citizens that would be sort of like instant referendums. And I am one of those who says that this is not useful at all as a system of governance because of the complexity of the issues we are facing. In Egypt today, right now, we are facing the issue of a nuclear station in Dab'a. Well, can you imagine asking people, would you agree or disagree with a nuclear station in Dab'a? What, I mean, I haven't seen the studies, I don't know about the environmental impacts, I don't know about the economics, the rates of return, the technology that will be used, the risks that are in there. How can possibly questions of that kind be put forward in a referendum form? There are limited things that can be put in referendum form, and we know that both in polls and in referendum forms, the results are very much skewed by the way the question is framed. So as a result, I think that at best we'll continue to have a lot more polls than we used to have, but polls are no substitute for leaders. Edmund Burke said to his constituents, if I simply reflect your opinion, then I'm doing you a disservice because I owe you not only my hard work, but also my judgment, those who elected me, and he's right in that. Abraham Lincoln, there's a beautiful cartoon that was in the New Yorker. It showed Abraham Lincoln talking to his cabinet and saying, okay, the poll is back, 3-1 against abolition of slavery, let the blacks stay. Now, we all know the difference. That is the difference of real leadership, political leadership, a democratic leader, and in every possible way that we can think of. So I think that there will be no escape from the fact that political leaders will be required to face up to the expectations of the people that have given them that power through formal elections, indirect elections, etc., is not really the key point. But the key point is really that we do not have simple answers in technology, but we do have the possibility to think outside of the box. Now, at the outset of this conference, I had asked three questions. Are the current modes of operation of democratic systems delivering the desired outcomes that we all want? The answer is no. And the reason the answer is no, that obviously one of those that we keep referring to, freedom, justice, equality. Well, Mr. Piketty has just done a major piece of work, very famous book called Capital, and in the 21st century, and in which he points out that the level of inequality today in wealth terms, concentration of wealth, is where we were in 1914. 1914. So the entire century, an entire century of efforts to improve on inequality have in fact almost been wiped out in the last 20 years by the concentration of wealth that people, without the 800 pages of analytical statistics of Mr. Piketty, felt. They felt it when they said the 99% that went down to occupy Wall Street. They didn't have the statistics, but they had the feeling things were not going right. This enormous concentration of wealth that's going on under the name of free trade and globalization, etc., still poses some questions for people. So we have to at least ensure a decent standard of living for everybody. We have to ensure a level of participation for everybody. So how to do it? So that was the first question. The second question, are we confusing the means such as elections with the results which are the desired outcomes? Well, in many of the transitional countries we have now felt, and you have had this summation again to remind us of what happened, that this has not really been happening sufficiently. But now we come to the third question I posed at the beginning of this conference, which are there new instruments that we could incorporate into our democratic models that would bring us closer to the desired outcomes? Now, please mind what I've just read. It is not, that's the question as I put it in the beginning. It is not a substitute for what exists. It is to incorporate new ideas. And so I felt, and this was hopefully yesterday, but we do it this morning right now, that we want to think of new ideas. And I'm very happy that we have a number of the most distinguished people who have worked on the issues of new ideas in the way of dealing with citizen participation in political decision-making and processes, and that we would spend the next couple of sessions on looking at these new possibilities before us. And one of them is really sortition. So my intention was to wrap up that, remind people that we really had not yet gone enough out of the box. We had criticized, yes, but proposals, not enough. And so I thought that at that moment, it would be right for me to remind people of that opening question and have on the same panel with one of the leaders of technology in Egypt. So no, Adli is a colleague in the Library of Alexandria who's on loan to the government of Egypt. She's the highest ranking IT person in Egypt right now. She built the IT department in the Library of Alexandria. So we're very proud to have her back here in this conference. But I think she will also accept that IT is not the ultimate solution for democracy. So what we have to do is to think differently. And I'm happy that we have Terry Boricius with us to tell us what to do on that. So for the next few sessions we'll go, but Terry, you should give I think he should give a teaser, Madam Chair, if you agree, and I will stop at that level just to remind you of that the third question was to come up with new ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sirajuddin. And now we are really looking forward to hearing from Terry, who has really have renowned work to reform voting methods, and he has been focusing on the non-electoral democracy reform through sortition. So here are with new instruments and new ideas, and Terry, the floor is yours.
Like Dr. Sirajuddin, I have cut my remarks down in half. We're going to beat the green lights. I'm a former politician. I was elected 5 times to city council and 5 times to the state legislature as a House of Representatives. And like an alcoholic, I refer to myself as a recovering politician. I was also a founder of 3 different political parties. So I'm not speaking merely as an academic, but as somebody who's been there. Discussions about the problems of democracy tend to focus on the problems of elections. But a fundamental point that needs to be understood is that elections are not the same thing as democracy and are at best one tool for approaching the democratic ideal. Clearly, a system of free and fair elections is a vast improvement over a dictatorship or a one-party state, but the ideal of democracy obviously goes much, much deeper. The democratic ideal can be summed up, as Lincoln said, as a government of, by, and for the people. but modern democracies all have government by a political class that is distinctly different than the people, mostly older, male, wealthier, better educated, from having the right connections. And whether government is truly for the people is always a matter of opinion. It's been said that a legislature ideally, quote, should be in miniature an exact portrait of the people at large. It should think, feel, reason, and act like them. The ideal of democracy is that the government should make the same decisions that the people as a whole would make if the people could all have the time, motivation, information, attention, expert advice, access to conflicting points of view, fact-checking of faulty assumptions, and good facilitation. Obviously, it is impossible to have all the people do this on even one issue, let alone the countless number of issues that a government must deal with. But we know exactly how to achieve this ideal by combining the principles of scientific sampling to select statistically representative, accurately representative mini-publics with good decision-making procedures. This selection by fate, if you will, of public officials is known as sortition. This would be government by the ordinary people, rather than by a political class with only the consent of the people. I want to draw a sharp distinction between the notion of democracy as consent, in which the people get to choose between the competing teams of would-be rulers, on the one hand, and self-rule, in which ordinary people participate in turns to rule themselves. Sortition in ancient Greece was used to fill nearly all public offices, including the Council of 500, which prepared the resolutions and agendas for the assembly. Nearly all magistrates were selected by lot and usually worked in teams of 10 to avoid risks of corruption or incompetence. The courts were made up of large numbers, sometimes numbering hundreds or even 1,000 citizens selected by lot. These juries could even overrule decisions made by the assembly. Public officials were monitored and audited by other randomly selected panels of citizens. And of particular interest to many of us in this reform, after 403 BC in Athens, the assembly gave up authority to make laws. Most people who've studied Greece or who've heard about Greece in school do not know this part. But in the reformed democracy of Athens, the assembly transferred the responsibility for making laws to a representative panels of lawmakers selected by fate. In ancient Greek, they were referred to as nomothetai. To the Athenians, selection by lot was an essential feature of democracy. Interestingly, some scholars have suggested that the Greeks may have learned about this procedure from ancient Egyptian religious practices. Contrary to the common belief that Athenian democracy has little relevance for modern nation states because people only talk about the assembly part, the Athenians had solved the problem of scale. The Athenians invented a system of government that worked at a larger than face-to-face scale, in which citizens ruled through representative institutions, mostly selected by lot. It was called democracy. The democratic tool of sortition is now mostly limited to such things as a court system in many countries where a jury is selected randomly. The modern descendant of assembly democracy is often considered to be the popular referendum process as exercised in places like Switzerland. But before we consider the possible advantages of such alternative means of democratic self-governments of the people, we should recognize some of the inevitable flaws of elections as a tool for democracy. I want to briefly mention just a few of the flaws as I see that are inherent. One fundamental reality is that any system based on mass elections is the concept of rational ignorance, a term coined by Anthony Downs, in his seminal work, An Economic Theory of Democracy. Having voters who are informed is essential for democracy to work, but most voters don't know much about most candidates or most issues. And the chance that any one voter's one vote will actually make a difference in the outcome of the election, the chances are vanishingly small. So it is not rational to spend a large amount of time informing yourself about the candidates and the issues. So, thus the term rational ignorance. That's the reasonable thing to do. And in fact, even if there are good candidates and a good voting system with proportional representation, many voters, the rational thing to do is to not bother to vote. And we've seen that in many places. Or if they do vote, to use mental shortcuts for deciding how to vote. A party label, ethnic, racial, religious background of the candidate, or perhaps just that this candidate has a friendly appearance or is handsome. All kinds of ways of deciding who to vote for, which none of us are particularly proud of, which do not strike us as particularly reasonable. But emotions tend to monopolize the election process. Sortition offers a solution. With a relatively small number of accurately representative citizens empowered to make group decisions, suddenly they have the motivation and the opportunity to overcome their own ignorance. Unlike a scientific sample of citizens responding to a public opinion poll, which is devoid of deliberation and maximizes citizen ignorance, sortition uses this scientific sampling, but then pairs it with good democratic process, such as education, expert knowledge, resistance to corruption, etc. The imperatives of electoral competition encourages candidates to portray their opponents as either foolish or evil. This demonization of the others can then have trickle-down negative effects throughout society. The nature of elections is such that it encourages both politicians and their supporters to think of winning elections as a mandate to do what they want. Think of the Muslim Brotherhood in view of their victory. The partisanship that is the essence of electoralism rarely incorporates any meaningful deliberation among diverse members of society. Politics is generally about winning power with little, if any, opportunity for problem solving, deliberation, or seeking win-win solutions to society's problems. Here again, sortition can offer a solution. The sessions to follow will have discussions of real-world implementations of forms of democracy outside the customary electoral arena. There is the participatory budgeting movement that took off in Brazil and then around the world. Hundreds and thousands of implementations. Beginning with the establishment of the Citizens' Assembly in British Columbia in Canada in 2004, randomly selected ordinary citizens have convened to tackle a variety of tasks over the world, constitutional amendments, special issues about local communities, municipal budgets. Rather than just adopting the Western tools of democracy centered exclusively on elections, it may be possible for developing democracies to leapfrog beyond the West and create stronger and better democracy by the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry, for this tour d'horizon of the concept of the sortition. And I would like to invite, if anybody in the floor had comments for 2 minutes in the sake of time. Mr. President.
Thank you. I'm being active in politics also, and much with a long experience. And of course, the greatness of the moment in which people wait in a line to vote, the extreme and absolute independence they have once they are inside the voting booth, are tremendous. When you think that they have all the options and they select your name without you knowing, it's really a marvel. Why do people vote? Well, thank God we don't know. because that's a mystery. Somebody, because he heard a good speech, because he belongs to your party, because he was at school with you, because he read your program, very few do. But that is the essence of that moment. You are freer than any other moment of your life, and you can choose without the presence of your mother-in-law, boss, anybody. That is very difficult to substitute, but there are certain aspects of a government in which a yes or no answer is what you need, and then you have plebiscites, for instance, in my country, plebiscites for every reform of the Constitution. There are 4 systems, but all of them end in one yes or no for the people to say. Or the referendum against a law, if you raise enough, gather enough signatures, you can call people to repeal that law in a secret ballot. Of course, we are a very small country, and that must be also taken in account. But I don't think that the way out of this crisis or difficulties or defects of democracy are to be found in going to the people. I sometimes think that saying participatory democracy is redundant. If there is a participative system, it's democracy. There are taints of balcony government, fascism, Chavez. The people will say yes or no. Who are the people in the street, in the square? Or will say yes or no electronically after your speech in the electronic balcony, which is TV. I don't think that's serious. That allows for exactly the wrong kind of leadership, because the leader that is good at speaking, catering at what the people want, won't have that essence of leadership that sometimes asks you to do hard things and against the public opinion. When the answer is black and white, as I was telling you, but imagine any other of the things that the parliament must vote on technology, on energy, on everything. Of course, people will say no to more taxes and yes to more expenditures. That's the nature of things. But when you have, as I did, 129 inflation per year when I arrived to government, and 7% of the GDP of deficit, we had to raise taxes brutally, but we achieved a superávit, and we began inflation going down to 40, but in the virtuous circle that arrived to 9 after the next government. Those things couldn't have been asked yes or no for the people. Which are the voices that we hear, sadly enough, very frequently? The system doesn't work. Well, perfecto. What have you done in the system? Because you have water in this?
No, not exactly.
What have we done? Have you only voted? Sometimes you need more than to vote. And how did you decide your vote? You read the program? You know about these people? So we are trying to put the burden on the politicians of the lack of work, the lack of interest of the voters. And in a democracy, you must know, and then that's the educational system. You need to educate people in the functioning of government and tell them that they need to, because they cannot come next Sunday and say, no, I was wrong last Sunday, please change my vote. It's once every 5 years. So people need to be more participatory in the, for instance, selection of the candidate. In the, for instance, writing down the program for provincial government, for national government, to get involved. Democracy is like a bicycle. If you don't pedal, it will fall. So there is an onus on the citizen. So it's easier to say, oh, the politicians are wrong. You will be right through the telephone or through the computer saying yes or no to very complex things. I think everybody in this position has a point in the defects they see to the system we have. But I don't think really, even at the lowest village level, 200 people, the famous town hall meeting, which is a myth. It can take place in a village of 200 people. Once. Second time, they won't come the 200. Only 150 will come. Because people feel and know that through representative government, Magna Carta, 800 years ago, they took the great step. I will send my man representing all this departamento, or this province, or this party, to say yes or no in my name. It's an act of confidence. It's a fantastic act of confidence. The other criticisms are well-founded. You said that, Mr. Borisiou said that money is, and that the politicians are the same. That's not true, in my country at least. I fear a bit the increased cost of campaigns, and now we are working, I'm out of parliament, but I'm working with my colleagues, to eliminate the private donations. Only public funding, and only use of the national television gratis by the candidates, none other, because 80% of the expenditures go to television. On the other side, in my country, in which we have the oldest party system in the world, 180 years old, it's more than 2 days, eh? Next year will be 180 years, 1836. There is a rotation. Every election, the names change on an average since 1984 of 70 to 50. So there is a renewal. So I don't think this very old, very well-tested system of representation needs a renewal, needs more activity, because that's what freedom is all about, and the free will, people can or cannot want or don't want to participate, but we must improve the possibility. And all other consultations, the polls, the asking for questions through a magnificent system we have now, must enrich the perspective of the representative. But he is to decide after. The first time I went to the States, and I'm finishing, when I was young, which I was sometime, in 1968, for the elections of Nixon-Humphrey, I was my first trip to the States, and we went to visit congressman offices, and I saw this electric cart at that time with big bags going through the corridor very silently. And I said, what's that? Oh, it's the mail. Ah. And one of the secretaries of this congressman told me, I'm in charge of mail. I'm in charge of classifying for or against. For me, it was quite a novelty. And then I found that the real citizens took the time to write the letter, put the stamp, go to the corner, put it into the postal system, and this man or woman representative took big interest, an important interest in saying, how are people commenting my last vote or the future vote? That can be done much more easily now. But I am for representative forever, because it's an act of confidence, one of the nicest most noble acts of receiving the support of people. And of course, there is the end of your term and the possibility of being reelected. If you are a congressman, I'm against re-election for presidents. Or the criticism you can get. But after the evolution of 800 years of this system, try to make it better and not to change it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. There was another comment?
I think I really would like to suggest that, if you don't mind, we really should not have many comments on this transitional session. This was intended just to give you a flavor of what's coming. You will have, in the coming sessions, a full discussion of actual examples and proposals. So I would propose that the reaction to these proposals be against the more complete presentation with actual examples. Shall we? Thank you.